let them eat Yellowcake. Iran gives enemies another excuse to bomb them. And of course, in the primary sense, it's more saber-rattling as the war is made to look imminent, as we're told in the media from all sides that the war is going to happen, as ships and troops are all moved in to surround the area. Now, Kurt Nimmo's got the report. Iran has provided the U.S. and Israel with another excuse to attack. The country has announced it will now produce Yellowcake. The head of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, Faridun Abbasam, you can tell my Arabic and Persian is not too good, said on Wednesday Iran has installed a new generation of centrifuges at the Natanz facility. Now, of course, Yellowcake was used in the propaganda in the buildup to the Iraq war. It'll probably be used now for the Iran war, even though the countries are only one letter apart. Supposedly, the general public's not even going to notice that they're using the same reasons again. But even if you just want to stay on the surface of this issue, you can't build up dictators, play chess with them, and then get upset when they turn out to not be your friends in the end. You don't trust dictators in the first place. We shouldn't be putting them in and trying to do all these Arab Spring things for decades and decades. Now, of course, it's a fact that Donald Rumsfeld met with Saddam Hussein back in the 80s when Iraq was at war with Iran, and we wanted to support that war and make sure they killed at least 1 million people. And so Rumsfeld sold him WMDs and chemical weapons and all that stuff, and later it kind of became a problem. Well, maybe it's a problem with Iran too, because when the Shah was in power, we were helping him build nuclear reactors, and now it's somehow not acceptable. Well, you got to factor that into your strategy, that your friends and allies are going to get kicked out of power or they're going to go bad on you. It's just absurd. You know, it's gallows humor because I hope this war doesn't happen. But of course, this war is spiraling into a regional, at least, war, and quite possibly the third overt world war, as Syrian opposition seeks to wipe the Assad name off the map via Google. Now, we know these tech companies have given a great deal of support to the whole Arab Spring and all the Western-backed intervention in that Middle East region, and here's just sort of more evidence of it. They're taking the Assad name off of the map, just as places like the Czech Republic did on the streets, removing their signs during the Velvet Revolution, so Russia would become disoriented back in the low-tech days and not be able to find their way around. Well, I guess this is not really like that. It's kind of more of a propaganda thing to let Assad know that he's been surrounded and that the technology giants are backing the regime change and pushing us into war. But the reports in the Washington Post, anti-government activists in recent weeks have used a Google crowdsourcing program, MapMaker, to rename key streets, bridges, and boulevards after the revolutionary heroes, according to oppositional figures in the Syrian government. The idea, activists say, has been to expunge the vestiges of the Assad family's 40-year rule and to commemorate protesters who've fallen over the course of the 11-month-old uprising, and to make sure that al-Qaeda is used to bring the country down and make sure that al-Qaeda is always our ally when we pretend they're our enemy to the American public. And of course, I'm ranting, and it's not like I'm saying Assad is good. I really don't like dictatorships as a form of government. But this is about Syria being a domino, specifically a domino to topple another domino, and on and on. That's what this is about. It doesn't have anything to do with the issues of Syria or what its people actually want. This is a fomented false revolution to prevent real revolutions from spreading across the world so that the empires who work in conjunction, the kind of multipolar Bilderberg people, can keep their client states in check. And there are other ways of keeping clients in check. One of them is the World Bank. It's a twin organization, of course, of the IMF. Both were set up in the waning years of World War II before the victor was officially decided at the Bretton Woods Conference, and it went with all those financial agreements. But what the IMF really does is set conditionalities on third world countries primarily and keep them in the empire, even as particularly the British Empire was running out of money, was forced to formally relinquish control over many of those regions, but wanted to, of course, keep the maximum influence in all those areas. The IMF and the World Bank were a great vehicle to make that happen because they could give loans to those countries, knowing the countries could never pay them back, and meanwhile impose their dream police state provisions on the countries: low wages, factory slave work, super globalization policies, infrastructure takeover, and of course privatization of all the resources for the corporate interests around the world who are hooked up with the larger system. Now, with that said, World Bank President Robert Zoellick, appointed in the final years of President Bush, is planning to step down in June. And there's a toss-up between if Hillary Clinton might take the post, or if Larry Summers might take the post, or if it would be some other tool puppet who's going to help to impose harsh things on various parts of the world. Of course, now the IMF and World Bank are being used in Europe. I'm sure it'll come to America in due time. But who is better? Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, head of the State Department, committed since 1974 to Henry Kissinger's depopulating the third world as the greatest #1 strategy through the guise of food aid, food as a weapon, or pushing vaccines on countries. She's great at that, so she would be very good at the World Bank. They also like to push vaccines and use that kind of thing as a conditionality for aid, all the micro-lending schemes they do. On the other hand, Larry Summers is very good at screwing people over, using fraudulent economic systems to induce people into greater poverty and debt. And he really played a large role, not only in dismantling Glass-Steagall, but in all the other things he did in the Clinton administration and the years after to trigger our current economic collapse. So he really would be great at the World Bank also, but I can't decide which evil puppet would be better. That is until I did some more digging on Larry Summers, and I think I've got to go with him because he was already at the World Bank as the chief economist in 1991. Well, that was the Bush years, wasn't it? The first Bush. And he has a little scandal, which I think is kind of nice. This would be good for the third world. Now, I'm being sarcastic. He has responded to the controversy over this memo after it leaked, saying it was sarcastic. It's really very nasty and really reveals the globalist mindset, how much they hate humanity, hate the third world, and want to use their corporate takeover model to really kill off a lot of people, too. Now, this is known as the Summers Memo. You can look it up on Wikipedia and other entities. It was disseminated in 1991. Larry Summers signed it along with Lant Pritchett. Lant Pritchett is allegedly the guy who wrote it. Anyway, it reads, "Dirty industries, just between you and me, shouldn't the World Bank be encouraging more migration of dirty industries to the least developed countries? I could think of 3 reasons. The first, the measurement of cost of health-impairing pollution depends on the foregone earnings from increased morbidity and mortality." You mean how they get everyone sick with cancer and then milk the medical treatment money out of people in the West? Well, he says that strategy is not really good for the developing world. And so Larry Summers and his buddy Lant Pritchett get more into this whole sarcastic philosophy of how you can't poison them long-term in the developing parts of the world. You have to kind of pollute them quickly. Now, he talks about point number 2, the cost of pollution are likely to be nonlinear, as the initial increments of pollution probably have a very low cost. He's always thought that the underpopulated countries in Africa are vastly underpolluted. In all caps, the air quality is probably vastly inefficiently low compared with Los Angeles and Mexico City. So they should put more toxic pollution in these countries. And he gets to the fact that it would be hard to trade more into this point of how, in number 3, when they have a mortality rate under age of 5 at 200 per thousand, it's kind of hard to milk money on things like prostate cancer out of them. It's better to pollute them more in the short term. Then he concludes this little tongue-in-cheek memo about poisoning the third world and wreaking the profits with the problem with the arguments against all these proposals for more pollution in the least developed countries, including intrinsic rights to certain goods, moral reasons, social concerns, lack of adequate markets, etc., could be turned around and more or less effectively used against every bank proposal for liberalization. And yeah, that form of trade liberalization is very predatory. It's not good for the actual people of these least developed countries. It's only really good for the predator class that wants to totally exploit those countries while keeping them under the larger wing of the empire. And of course, a lot of these very predatory dynamics are outlined in John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. You can also pretty much understand it by watching documentaries like Life Plus Debt, about how the IMF was used to further destroy Jamaica and really put it into just completely unsustainable debt as they preach to the world about sustainable environments, sustainable economies. Anyway, so in a sketchy sort of manner, I say we do nominate Larry Summers for World Bank president, because he did such a good job as economic chief there and really showed his love for the third world and the people there. Now, in sort of related news, because Larry Summers is on Obama's Economic Council, Obama on failed promise to cut deficit in half. Recession turned out to be a lot deeper. Oh, he didn't know. He thought things were going to improve, but it turns out they're not really going to improve. Well, we're not there, because this recession turned out to be a lot deeper than any of us realized. Obama said about his inability to cut the deficit in half in an interview. And, well, didn't they tell him his job is just to distract everyone while they, successfully complete the total implosion and consolidation of wealth operation, the greatest transfer of wealth in all of history, the looting of the middle class, the squeezing of the middle class, the further deprecating of the poverty class, the increase of the gap between the super wealthy and everyone else. Yeah, good job, Obama. Just keep telling them it's going to be all right, and don't look at the man behind the curtain, whatever you do. And, of course, a lot of people have wondered how truth could have ever been aired in the first place on a mainstream, M-E-M-E, regurgitated propaganda media channel like Fox News. Well, now we sort of have our answer, as Napolitano's show has been canceled. Judge Napolitano, so long, America, only truthful mainstream news show ends. Napolitano signs off from Freedom Watch with the promise to keep defending freedom whenever I can. And of course, you heard about this in the days past, but he's ended his final episode with a promise to keep fighting for freedom and a reminder that even the revolutionary battle was not won easily. There was never a majority. It was always that tireless minority that John Adams talked about. He said, the judge closed the last edition of Freedom Watch in the same way he normally does, with a message regarding adherence to the vision of the Founding Fathers and the hard-fought liberties protected by the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Napolitano flagged up the fact that only a third of Americans supported the revolution and another third expressed no interest in the matter. Now it's 90%, but we got to make do with what we can. In a clear message to his critics, the judge noted the Founding Fathers risked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, but they were not saints, and originally their cause was not popular. And freedom is popular in the hearts of men and women today. People are learning and rediscovering liberty. Judge Napolitano did play a part in that. We shouldn't give up. We've had so many victories already. We've got to realize that, but we've got to use the power of the internet and the other new media techniques while they're still at our hands to make sure that message is heard by everyone, whether they ignore it, whether they curse it and laugh at it and scoff at it, or whether they take heed and start taking action like so many of our viewers have done. We are going to win this battle, and Napolitano will keep doing his part, but the part on Fox News apparently is coming to an end. Another alarming item, prepper declared mentally defective, put on FBI list. Now, this is David Sardi. You may have seen him if you're in the TV watching culture. I no longer am. On Doomsday Prepper, the popular National Geographic show. And he went into the doctor. He's a very large guy, may have had a lot of heart problems. I've heard about him having breathing problems. And it says, when Sardi refused to have tubes inserted, Olivier, his doctor, insinuated that he would be suicidal and insisted on Sardi going to the emergency room. Sardi refused and left the hospital, but within 15 minutes of arriving at his home, police arrived at his house and forcibly took him to the emergency room. When Sardi later attempted to purchase a Glock 21 firearm, he was flagged by the National Instant Criminal Background Check System and refused the sale. When he appealed, he received a letter from the FBI stating that he had been declared mentally defective and was not allowed to own firearms. Now, there's a few elements to this story. Are they trying to send a message to people in the prepper or near the prepper community out there that they won't be allowed to do what they're doing to try to discourage people from joining this community? I don't know. All I know is I've seen the YouTube from David Sardi, his account of the story, and he says the doctor was trying to insinuate he was suicidal. Told him, no, I'm not suicidal. I'm a Christian. My ethics don't allow me to commit suicide. I'll never commit suicide. But he was put on this mentally defective list anyway, taking away his uninfringible Second Amendment right. And he's gone on to say he really almost lost interest in doing his prep work, saying he even has nothing to live for if he doesn't have his right to bear arms. And whatever you may think of this real interesting character who's being broadcast on TV, he's got a point. I mean, there's something fundamental about that right to bear arms. First, let them eat Yellowcake. Iran gives enemies another excuse to bomb them. And of course, in the primary sense, it's more saber-rattling. As today, Iran has installed a new generation of centrifuges at the Natanz facility. Now, of course, Yellowcake was used in the propaganda in the buildup to the Iraq war. It'll probably be used now for the Iran war, even though the countries are only one letter apart. Supposedly, the general public's not even going to notice that they're using the same reasons again. But even if you just want to stay on the surface of this issue, you can't build up dictators, play chess with them, and then get upset. It's a problem with Iran, too, because when the Shah was in power, we were helping him build nuclear reactors, and now it's somehow not acceptable. Well, you got to factor that into your strategy, that your friends and allies are going to get kicked out of power, or they're going to go bad on you. It's just absurd. You know, it's gallows humor because I hope this war doesn't happen. But of course, this war is spiraling into a regional, at least, war, and quite possibly the third. As the war is made to look imminent, as we're told in the media from all sides that the war is going to happen, as ships and troops are all moved in to surround the area. Now, Kurt Nimmo's got the report. Iran has provided the U.S. and Israel with another excuse to attack. The country has announced it will now produce Yellowcake. The head of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, Faridun Abbasam, you can tell my Arabic and Persian is not too good, said on Wednesday they turn out to not be your friends in the end. You don't trust dictators in the first place. We shouldn't be putting them in and trying to do all these Arab Spring things for decades and decades. Now, of course, it's a fact that Donald Rumsfeld met with Saddam Hussein back in the 80s when Iraq was at war with Iran, and we wanted to support that war and make sure they killed at least 1 million people. And so Rumsfeld sold him WMDs and chemical weapons and all that stuff, and later it kind of became a problem. Well, maybe